Welcome back to Crypto Equation. And today we are stepping into a truth that millions of investors have tried to ignore for years, but can no longer look away from, because owning 3,000 XRP is not a small decision, and it is not a speculative gamble. It is a strategic position in a digital financial system that is evolving faster than anyone expected, and the world is finally starting to wake up to it. There was a time when XRP was dismissed, when people joked about it, when analysts pretended it had no purpose, when critics shrugged at the idea of real-time settlement. That time is over. The truth is rising to the surface, and what once looked like a niche project now looks like the backbone of a new global financial era. You cannot ignore XRP anymore, not because of hype, not because of predictions, but because of the structural transformation happening beneath the world's banking and liquidity systems. 3,000 XRP is not just 3,000 units of a digital asset. It represents a foothold in the future, a place in the new architecture of value movement, a position that will look increasingly rare as global systems evolve. It represents a level of early adoption that will vanish once utility absorbs supply and XRP transitions from a market asset into a settlement instrument. We are entering an era where access to XRP will not be as open as it is today, an era where the public float shrinks, an era where institutions absorb more liquidity, an era where settlement rails consume supply permanently. This is why owning 3,000 XRP will soon become something that is not optional for people who understand where the system is heading. It will become a foundation. It will become a shield. It will become a strategic position in the most significant financial migration of our lifetimes. The first truth about owning 3,000 XRP is that the world is preparing for a reset in how money moves, and when systems reset, the assets that support the new rails become invaluable. Right now, global finance is still pretending it can survive on systems built 50 years ago. Systems that rely on pre-funded accounts. Systems that move money slower than data. Systems that break under the pressure of digital economies. This illusion is collapsing. The reset is approaching because the gap between the digital economy and the old banking infrastructure has become too large to sustain. And in every financial reset throughout history, those who positioned early benefited not because they predicted price, but because they understood architecture. This is where XRP stands today. The second truth about owning 3,000 XRP is that the supply landscape is changing. People still see XRP on exchanges and assume it will always be there. They assume it will always be accessible. They assume they will be able to buy more later. They assume the float will remain large enough for retail participation. They are wrong. When global financial systems activate new liquidity rails, XRP will be absorbed into corridors, into institutional systems, into settlement engines that never return supply to the public market. People still imagine XRP as a speculative token. Institutions see XRP as infrastructure, and infrastructure does not sit on public exchanges forever. This is why owning 3,000 XRP now is radically different from trying to accumulate it later. Later does not exist in the way people think. The third truth about owning 3,000 XRP is that tokenization is going to force settlement rails to evolve faster than anyone expects. Trillions of dollars in bonds, equities, real estate commodities, and treasury instruments are moving into digital form. These assets cannot settle on slow rails. They require instant settlement. Instant settlement requires neutral liquidity. Neutral liquidity requires an asset built exactly for this purpose. XRP is one of the only assets that fits the requirement. When tokenization reaches full-scale, demand for XRP will not rise gradually, it will rise structurally. Systemic demand does not behave like speculative demand. It is consistent, continuous, and permanent. When this happens, 3,000 XRP becomes something extraordinary, not because of hype, but because of scarcity. The fourth truth is the transition from pre-funded liquidity to on-demand liquidity. Right now, banks lock away trillions of dollars just to allow slow settlement. This system wastes liquidity on a global scale, but the digital world cannot operate with liquidity trapped behind borders. The new world eliminates pre-funding entirely. This is the core of the reset. When banks remove pre-funding, they must adopt instant liquidity models. Instant liquidity models require digital settlement instruments. The first choice for these instruments will be assets designed for speed, neutrality, and interoperability. This is XRP's design. 3,000 XRP becomes part of a liquidity layer that institutions will rely on daily. The fifth truth is the collapse of settlement delays. Everything else in the digital world moves instantly. Only money lags behind. The world cannot move into real-time identity, real-time commerce, real-time automation, real-time tokenized markets, real-time clearing, and real-time compliance, while settlement takes hours or days. This is the point where the system breaks. and when it breaks, it resets. In a world where everything demands instant interaction, assets that support instant liquidity become essential. 3000 XRP becomes a position inside a new global engine where delay is no longer acceptable and every asset must settle at the speed of information. The sixth truth is interoperability. The future financial world is not built on one blockchain. It is not built on one CBDC. It is not built on one national system. It is multi-chain. It is multi-currency. It is multi-platform. And none of these systems can speak to one another without a bridge. A bridge must be neutral, decentralized, scalable, and capable of settling value instantly without remittance friction. This is where XRP stands as one of the strongest candidates for global interoperability. 3000 XRP is not a bet. It is a stake in a bridge the world will eventually need. The seventh truth is the rise of corporate digital networks. Corporations are building private blockchains and internal digital settlement systems. They will need liquidity to interact with global markets. They cannot rely on traditional rails. They cannot wait for bank clearance. They cannot operate without instant value movement. Corporate adoption of settlement assets will create more demand for XRP inside systems, not on exchanges. This is how public supply disappears quietly. 3000 XRP becomes a personal liquidity reserve in a world where most liquidity shifts into institutions. The eighth truth is the regulatory alignment already happening worldwide. People think regulators are targeting crypto. They are not. They are preparing for a digital future. Regulators want instant compliance, instant reporting, structured messaging, automated transparency. This requires a settlement system that can produce consistent, reliable, verifiable data at the speed of global value movement. XRP is one of the few assets with architecture aligned to this long-term regulatory vision. When regulations shift, XRP moves from speculation into infrastructure. This is when ownership becomes privilege, and 3000 XRP becomes a position that people will wish they had secured sooner. The ninth truth is the global synchronization of financial upgrades. It is not random that banks worldwide are upgrading systems at the same time. Synchronization is a warning signal. It means the world is preparing for a new system. It means the old system has reached maximum inefficiency. It means digital rails are coming faster than people expect. When synchronized changes occur, the transformation that follows is rapid. This is why owning 3000 XRP becomes critical before the transition completes. The 10th truth is the collapse of exchange liquidity. Most people assume exchanges will always offer XRP, but exchanges rely on circulating supply. Once supply shrinks, corridors will take priority. Custodians will take priority. Institutions will take priority. Public markets will become a secondary liquidity layer, not the primary one. This is one of the biggest secrets in finance. Settlement assets eventually leave the public float. 3000 XRP becomes a rare asset not because of price, but because of access. The 11th truth is that the world does not yet understand what XRP actually is. People see it as crypto. Institutions see it as infrastructure. People see it as a token. The system sees it as a bridge. People see it as speculative. The future sees it as mandatory. This misunderstanding is exactly why 3000 XRP is still affordable today. It will not be affordable later. The transformation taking place is not speculation. It is systemic. And 3000 XRP is a level of ownership that sits right between early adoption and future scarcity. People cannot ignore it anymore because the global financial architecture is evolving into the exact shape XRP was designed to support. In part 2, we will go deeper into the collapse of liquidity silos, the institutional absorption model, the supply shock timeline, the global settlement engine, and why 3000 XRP will become one of the most sought-after personal positions in the new digital financial era. Because now that we have peeled back the first layers of truth behind owning 3000 XRP, we must go even deeper into the structural transformation unfolding across the global financial system, the disappearance of accessible supply, and the reason this number carries weight far beyond speculation. The world is entering a point of no return, a moment, when digital rails become unavoidable, and every asset built for instant settlement becomes foundational to the architecture of global value flow. 3000 XRP is a position inside this shift, a position that will look normal today, but extraordinary in the near future, because as the system changes, the meaning of ownership changes with it. The 12th truth about owning 3000 XRP is the collapse of liquidity silos that define today's financial world. Every country, every bank, every payment network, every institution currently holds liquidity in isolation. This fragmentation slows down the global economy and traps value in outdated structures. But the digital world cannot function with isolated liquidity. Fragmentation dies in a digital economy. Global liquidity must flow freely. To unify liquidity, a neutral asset is required. This is where XRP fits. When liquidity silos collapse, XRP becomes the lubricant of the global engine. 3,000 XRP becomes a micro-share of a new unified liquidity layer. The 13th truth is the shift to 24/7 financial infrastructure. The old system was built for human schedules, banking hours, settlement windows, and batch processing. But the digital world has no hours, no windows, and no waiting. Automation cannot wait. AI systems cannot wait. Smart contracts cannot wait. Digital markets cannot wait. To operate 24/7 systems need 24/7 liquidity. Traditional rails cannot provide that. XRP can. This shift increases XRP's importance beyond speculation. It becomes a permanent liquidity mechanism. 3,000 XRP becomes a piece of future real-time liquidity. The 14th truth is the institutional liquidity buffer model. In the new financial world, institutions will be required to maintain digital liquidity buffers to support automated and instant settlement. These buffers consume XRP because they must be instant neutral and globally transferable. Institutions will not use speculative assets for buffers. They will use settlement assets. This is where supply disappears quietly. Every buffer removes XRP permanently from public circulation. 3,000 XRP becomes part of the remaining accessible float, something that becomes increasingly rare as buffers absorb more supply. The 15th truth is the emergence of cross-border digital commerce. E-commerce is transforming into global digital commerce powered by instant payments, instant settlement, tokenized goods, and automated cross-border flows. The old rails cannot support this. Digital commerce requires bridge assets that settle instantly. XRP will be one of the instruments behind these flows. The larger digital commerce becomes the more XRP becomes consumed by the system. 3,000 XRP becomes a personal stake in a commerce engine that the world will depend on. The 16th truth is velocity saturation. Velocity is the rate at which an asset can move through the system. XRP has one of the highest settlement velocities ever engineered, but even velocity hits limits as global volume grows. When velocity becomes insufficient, the system must hold more XRP to compensate. This is what creates structural demand. This is what absorbs supply. This is why institutions eventually need more XRP than they first anticipated. 3,000 XRP becomes significantly more meaningful when system velocity reaches saturation points. The 17th truth is that smart financial systems will rely on settlement assets that never sleep. As the world moves into automated trading, automated lending, automated corporate flows, automated invoicing, and automated settlements, these systems require assets that settle without human involvement. This eliminates traditional payment rails. This accelerates the need for digital settlement assets. XRP becomes an invisible backbone behind these flows. 3,000 XRP becomes a long-term position in a system where automation dominates. The 18th truth is the disappearance of retail supply. Most people assume that even as institutions adopt XRP, there will still be enough left for public trading. This is a mistake. Retail supply shrinks long before retail realizes what is happening. XRP leaves exchanges through institutional custody, long-term holding, cold storage migration, corridor, activation, liquidity, pool, absorption, tokenized market settlement, corporate treasury systems. None of this returns supply. Once XRP enters these systems, it becomes structural capital. 3,000 XRP becomes a privilege once retail availability dries up. The 19th truth is the macroeconomic transition. The world is moving from inflationary currency models into digitized monetary mechanisms. Digital systems require settlement in digital form. Digital settlement requires neutral rails. Neutral rails require assets like XRP. As macroeconomic pressure rises, the adoption of efficient settlement assets accelerates. XRP becomes relevant not because of speculation, but because of economic necessity. 3,000 XRP becomes a hedge against the inefficiency of old monetary systems. The 20th truth is the rise of synthetic liquidity. Synthetic liquidity refers to liquidity created through tokenized assets and automated financial systems. But synthetic liquidity cannot settle itself. It must settle through a real asset. XRP becomes one of the foundations for synthetic settlement. This ties XRP into the largest financial transformation in history. 3,000 XRP becomes a stake in a synthetic global liquidity engine. The 21st truth is the regulatory shift toward liquidity-based classification. Regulators are beginning to treat assets differently based on their function. Speculative tokens fall under one category. Settlement assets fall under another. XRP sits in the settlement category. When classification shifts, XRP transitions from a speculative market asset into a regulated settlement instrument. This shifts demand from retail to institutions. This shifts access from open markets to custody systems. 3,000 XRP becomes part of the finite supply that remains outside institutional walls. The 22nd truth is the end of traditional correspondent banking. Correspondent banking is slow, expensive, and inefficient. The world is moving away from it. The global economy cannot operate on systems from the 1970s. Real-time digital rails will replace correspondent banking. Those rails require a settlement bridge that can handle global transfer at scale. XRP fits this role with surgical precision. 3,000 XRP becomes a position in the rail system of the future. The 23rd truth is the global liquidity rebalance. Value will no longer move through regional hubs. It will move through global liquidity layers. These layers require a universal asset that is accepted by all chains, all currencies, and all systems. XRP is one of the few assets capable of operating at this global layer. 3,000 XRP becomes a personal share of a new financial grid. The 24th truth is the collapse of manual settlement. The world is moving toward automated clearing and instant finality. Manual settlement cannot survive this shift. Financial institutions know this. They are preparing for automated settlement rails that run nonstop. XRP is engineered for nonstop settlement. 3,000 XRP becomes a position inside the automation revolution. The 25th truth is institutional exclusivity. Infrastructural assets eventually leave the retail market. Gold did it, oil did it, foreign exchange instruments did it, now digital settlement assets will do it. Institutions will eventually control the majority of XRP. Retail markets will hold fragments. 3,000 XRP becomes a strategic early allocation before exclusivity rises. The 26th truth is the convergence of central bank digital currencies. CBDCs will not replace XRP. They will rely on interoperability layers, settlement layers, bridge assets. A CBDC cannot settle with another CBDC without a neutral mechanism in the middle. XRP becomes part of that neutral mechanism. 3,000 XRP becomes a position in the intersection of global currencies. The 27th truth is the activation of multi-corridor liquidity engines. When multiple corridors activate simultaneously, the system requires exponentially more XRP. This is one of the most underestimated dynamics in digital liquidity. XRP demand grows exponentially, not linearly. 3,000 XRP becomes a micro-component of a liquidity engine that grows far beyond what individuals can imagine. The 28th truth is the psychological transformation that will hit the world during the reset. The moment people realize XRP is not a speculative token but a global settlement instrument, the narrative around it changes permanently. The public will not understand this until after the transition. And when they finally understand what XRP is, they will not be able to accumulate meaningful amounts anymore. 3,000 XRP becomes a symbol of foresight. The 29th truth is the disappearance of price-driven thinking. During the reset, XRP's value is not driven by speculation. It is driven by utility. Utility-driven value behaves differently. It grows structurally. It grows consistently. It grows with global adoption. 3,000 XRP becomes a long-term structural asset, not a speculative position. The 30th truth is the real meaning of ownership in the new world. The reset will redefine what it means to own an asset. To own XRP is to hold a piece of the global settlement layer. To hold 3,000 XRP is to own a share of the future liquidity engine. To ignore XRP is to ignore the financial transformation unfolding silently but powerfully across the world. You cannot ignore it anymore. The world cannot ignore it anymore. The system is changing. The rails are evolving. The liquidity is shifting. And the asset built for this exact moment is standing in plain sight. 3,000 XRP is not a gamble. It is a position in the backbone of a new financial era. People cannot ignore it anymore because the global financial architecture is evolving into the exact shape XRP was designed to support. In part 2, we will go deeper into the collapse of liquidity silos, the institutional absorption model, the supply shock timeline, the global settlement engine, and why 3,000 XRP will become one of the most sought-after personal positions in the new digital financial era.